I think we are online. Yes, okay. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the first of a small series of meetings to spread the word about the CO3 project. CO3 is a European project funded under the program Horizon 2020, and the name is CO3 because this CO3 refers to CRO project, co-production and co-management of services in collaboration with public administration, citizens and associations. In particular, the project wants to test the use of some innovative technologies in co-production and service concessions. These technologies are the blockchain, augmented reality, geo-localized social networks, tools of gamification, and liquid democracy. It is a project that will take place in 3 European cities, Turin, Paris, and Athens. The experimentation on Turin will focus on Case del Quartiere, the network community places connected to the city of Turin, which is among the Italian partners of the project, together with the University of Turin, which is the project leader, and the Links Foundation. We will have time to talk about how these technologies will be experimented in Casa del Quartiere. The idea is to create augmented reality spaces in which citizens, associations and bodies managing these premises have the possibility to create interactive tools with contents that can be video activities or even financial objects created with the blockchain. The blockchain will make it possible to have a sort of local currency in the form of a prepaid card that citizens will be able to buy and use for all the services and products offered inside Casa del Quartiere and other associations or citizens. Gamification will be a tool to encourage and promote certain behaviors. In this first meeting today, we will start to familiarize with two of these terminologies, augmented reality and gamification. We thought it might be useful before actually starting to use these technologies in Casa del Quartiere to try to understand what they are, uh, what are their application in everyday life and the different services that we have the chance to meet in our daily life and how they could have a greater impact on our lives in the future. To go deeper into details, we involved two of the Turin partners in the project, the Links Foundation and the University of Turin. We focused a bit on urban and social applications of these technologies, so we won't talk so much about Pokemon Go, for example. We will talk about augmented reality services applications in the urban environment. Let's start with augmented reality, and for this we have with us Federico Biggio, who is a PhD student at the University of Turin, to whom I will now leave the floor. Thank you, Vittorio. Thank you all for the invitation. So, I would just start by sharing the screen so that we can start. Do you confirm that everything works? Yes, okay. Thank you. I'm Federico Biggio. I'm a PhD student at the University of Turin in semiotics and media under the Department of Philosophy. Semiotics is the discipline that straddles linguistics and philosophy of language. which studies the phenomena of communication, and in particular digital media. I'm doing a PhD thesis completely focused on augmented reality. So I'm very pleased to be here talking about augmented reality, also to get out a little bit from the academic meta-language and actually understand the concrete application in urban areas as social processes and skills. Augmented reality is a very complex topic, not only because it is an emerging media, but for at least three reasons. Everyone associates it with Pokemon Go. In fact, as you said, Vittorio, which is therefore an extremely playful, if not even childish dimension. Those who do not associate it with Pokemon Go associate it with science fiction and science fiction films, in which augmented reality is a superpower of fictional characters like cyborgs who can see holograms and so on, and those who finally do not associate it with either Pokemon Go or this science fiction fantasy are beginning to discover its potential but use it fundamentally as an engagement factor for the public and above all in marketing or sales, which is certainly what interests us most, but not only. My aim in this presentation will be to make a quick excursus on these beliefs, aiming not at making a social survey, but to actually understand what people think about what we as a social and cultural community think when we use the expression augmented reality, and then to get to the specific context of smart cities in the urban context and see in an interesting way how all this playful and entertainment related nature has developed in the past years is not put aside when we think about terribly serious augmented reality application, but is yet useful and turns into gamification. But this will be the topic of our second speaker. Shortly put, augmented reality has had a series of applications in the contemporary media landscape, and we'll start from this. Then we'll get to the urban context, and finally to the reflection on the CEOs of the project. I've tried to combine the three CEO in augmented reality technology to respond to these three ideas of co-project, co-management, and co-production. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, a small preamble. Augmented reality is not virtual reality. We all know that. But it is important to underline it precisely because of what we said at the beginning, that augmented reality is associated with a playful dimension of experience. But from a formal point of view, we know that it is immediately recognizable because its peculiarity, whether it is Pokemon Go or a serious application, is that it allows the user to visualize virtual contents, which can be alphanumeric information, indicators, figures, science fiction, images made with computers, that are not physically present in the real world and that an application allows to visualize by activating a whole series of dissenting processes. For example, the possibility to access a surreal dimension, to be able to manipulate virtual elements that are not physically present, and so on. Today, augmented reality is still often confused with virtual reality, but thanks to the fact that even in virtual reality you start to know different professional applications, augmented reality becomes a serious technology and you start to detach from its original conception. Let's say that augmented reality of the origins, at least in Italy, ends in 2016 when the Pokemon Go phenomenon arrives and begins to introduce the term augmented reality in newspapers, television, and so on. People, ordinary users, common people already familiar with it, begin to wonder what augmented reality is, and above all, designers, local designers, urban planners, and so on, begin to wonder what can be done seriously with augmented reality and, just as I said, rediscover its roots. And we see that the roots of augmented reality are in fact linked to playful entertainment applications, but the same expression was used in industry by two Boeing technicians who created this first prototype to give workers a super view, an augmented view that allowed them to control the assembly process and the production process, being helped by virtual information that was projected directly onto the retina or display of the device, leaving their hands free to operate freely on the work process. This concept that links augmented reality to the idea of increasing the performance of the human being, and especially of workers in industry or even soldiers in the army in the field of war, is a trend that has not disappeared. In any case, if we remember the Google glasses, this type of augmented reality that in 2013 was to be introduced on the consumer market and then flopped, it has continued to be adopted in the industrial sector in beta version, and therefore still today, and even today, augmented reality is used in serious environment. Another concept that I would like to introduce without dwelling too much on it is that of ubiquitous computing. This marks a bit of a shift from augmented reality to a wider concept, which means we don't conceive augmented reality only as the visualization of virtual content within a device that simultaneously frames a portion of reality with which content is added, but more generally, what does it mean to increase reality? Ubiquitous computing is a paradigm of computational communication, which is the characteristic condition of contemporary digital, where computational processes are invisible and hidden inside everyday objects that become intelligent. Precisely, these devices that may be IoTs, wearable technologies, like digital clocks, but in general, a whole series of urban infrastructures that continuously collect data on the user's activity, on the user's action profile, and so on. This mechanism of data collection and interpretation of reciprocal data exchange is already an idea that can recall that of increasing reality. Yet in this case, it is not the user who increases reality, but a system that stands on a higher level, which is not the organic physical level of reality, but that of data, computers, virtual worlds. This reminds us of a biplane nature of the classic digital object, that is the one between a superficial level, the interface, with which the user interacts, and the deep computational one where a series of algorithms perform a series of functions on databases. But this is an idea that we will take up later again. This small diagram wants to illustrate how this new concept of augmented reality works and explains precisely the idea that the user continuously produces data that is collected, processed and returned to the user in the form of personalized information. What does this mean? It means that when the user interfaces with it, he sees a reality that is profoundly different from the concrete one he is used to experiencing on a daily basis. A reality that is personalized and built ad hoc for a certain community. Salvatore Iacconesi and Oriana Persico's Media Artist Group coined this very interesting expression, digital urban acupuncture, recalling the idea of acupuncture through which you select a series of data within the territory, you extract them, you create a narrative, and makes them become a real narration. For example, they invented an artificial intelligence in the neighborhood in which citizens could write their story through a repository data writing that was then processed by this artificial intelligence and transformed into useful knowledge, then communicated to the citizens in an empathic way with a glance to urban regeneration. This is the general framework in which we can move if we want to shift from a simple concept of augmented reality to a more complex one that concerns the possibility offered to users through augmented reality technology to manage visualization, data and knowledge that users themselves produced on a given territory, which in the case of the project is that of a neighborhood, a city, etc. Everything from the point of view of active citizenship. Going back to the functioning, the definition of augmented reality, it's important to underline these three phases that every augmented reality application, whether playful or serious, must have. That is, an augmentable surface in the real world, as can be a QR code, so something physical with which one interacts through a personal device equipped with a camera and that therefore captures this QR code. There must also always be an interactive choice of the content to be increased, which therefore constitutes an enrichment of reality, in this case a browsing between various objects that can be displayed in the real world, and then at the end the combined display of real and virtual. Today, augmented reality, as we were saying, can be associated with recreational applications, but also museum applications related to cultural heritage, navigation applications, such as Google Maps extensions, to display virtual indications in augmented reality navigation, drivertising applications, which is basically the possibility in the marketing field to predict how an object or item would look like on your body or in your room. I want to buy a dress, for instance. I use augmented reality to see how it looks on my body even before buying it. I can see it on my body. Educational applications in which augmented reality allows you to visualize scientific objects of knowledge, otherwise unknown from a visual point of view, or that would require a different, more in-depth study. And then artistic applications. Well, we can say in general that all these types of applications respond to a need of engagement of those who develop the application. But if we want to connect to that more complex idea of augmented reality we introduced before, we have to ask ourselves what these applications produce in terms of increase of user performance, in the sense that an augmented reality application can serve the entrepreneurial subject like the engagement. If it has to serve as a cognitive increase of the user, it must also serve the user to improve his or her experience. And here, for example, in this image, which is the first magazine that inserts an augmented reality QR code on its cover to display different types of content. So here we have the value of immediacy of interaction, a practical value that translates into easy access to content, etc. Anyway, we are always faced with a division between individual value and collective value. For example, an augmented reality application for cultural heritage allows users, in this case tourists, to enjoy more immersive, more engaging tourist experience, or a drivertising application allows the user to improve their shopping experience from a pragmatic point of view so as not to fail the purchase, because it was possible to see a dress first. This is not to trivialize, but to underline the fact that technology is augmented reality, even if we conceive it not in a playful sense, but in a serious sense. We are facing a technology that allows and enables an improvement in the performance of the individual, not of the community, despite the fact that collaborative augmented reality application exist and are beginning to be discovered in these times of pandemic and smart working. The difference simply is that in an augmented reality, applications are focused on the individual and his or her knowledge is being used. In one of those collective value, augmented reality allows multiple people to interact with the same virtual content and thus community knowledge, collective intelligence. Here are the two examples that I have included. Again, in the case of cultural heritage, applications of narratives that allow everyone to build a common story. In this case, in the first case, the fall of the Twin Towers, or in the second case, the imagination of a possible future. The second image represents periscopes in Malmo that were installed in various parts of the city and that allowed users to move around and visualize how the city could open up in the future following a series of urban transformations. Here we begin to move from individual to collective value. The experience of engagement is always individual, but the value that the application promotes is collective. It is obvious, however, that the shift from a concept of augmented reality that is linked to play and entertainment to a more serious concept linked to performance improvement is to be made progressively, especially if we look at augmented reality applications in urban contexts that have been the most successful ones so far. Let's leave Pokemon Go alone. Let's focus on the collective dimension. For example, many artistic augmented reality experiments have served as a catalyst for activist protest speeches during, for example, the 2011 New York City demonstration to occupy Wall Street. Protesters used and developed augmented reality applications to virtually demonstrate in places where the demonstration was banned. And then other images on the various social networks, a story that was a reminder of the first holographic protest in Madrid in 2015, where the government had banned the possibility of walking in the streets to demonstrate. A whole series of holograms of the protesters who went in front of the Spanish parliament was created. Not only activism and polemics, but augmented reality in the urban environment. We are beginning to see how it also begins to be conceived as a political tool to do something that cannot be done in reality and simulate it. a sector that is different from the polemical dimension of activism is that of urban art, in which, for example, the project we see here, a project of B-Part, which involves museums and urban regeneration that started in Milan in 2013 and that was developed also in Palermo, in Venice, and also in Turin. It consisted of several workshops in which the participants first selected works of street art murals in the city, especially also located in peripheral places of the city, and interpreted these works and developed content in augmented reality that could be used through the application of B-Part, thus giving life to a real museum of urban art as it was defined. It's interesting to note here that not only is there a philosophic and artistical reflection on the use of art, but also a reflection under a sociologic and urbanist point of view on how to use art and augmented reality to enhance repurpose suburbs through active participation of the public, citizens or tourists who don't leave the city on a daily basis, but leave it only for a short period. Following this direction, we can find this year's project, Augmented City, in Bari, which is probably the most stereotypical project of augmented reality in which an application is developed, especially for tourists, where they can see the points of interest on the city directly superimposed on buildings, monuments, and so on. In this case, it is interesting because it's precisely a series of tools and software that are easy to use and are called software development kit. It means that there's no need to have super programming skills to develop these applications, but that any entrepreneurial social subject in the city can interface with this software, which of course is in the cloud, on the web, and can manipulate and create their own image in the virtual dimension, and therefore control the virtual contents that a possible user will visualize in a set of context. The problem that arises at this point, in order to answer the question we were asking ourselves before, is whether the use of augmented reality to support communities to enhance significant elements for its components must be able to lay the foundations on a narrative substrate, visual experience. For example, museums and heritage conservation institutions are also the holders of public history and therefore create a transformation of history and narration, and through this process they write the experience of augmented reality. The question we have to ask ourselves is therefore, what is the story that can be told with augmented reality? In the cases we have seen, stories of activism, stories of how to benefit from art, stories of tourism, and above all, what story allows us to shift our attention from the individual to the collective value. The transition from hyper-reality to planet the smart city, let's say. So I'll quickly show you this video. I won't show it all because it's a bit long, but just to explain visually what is the difference between individual and collective value. This is one of the first short films in which the functioning of augmented reality is shown, and which is a bit part of the dystopian genre. Let's start the video. Okay, let's mute it. Augmented reality in this video is presented as an improvement of the user's digital experience, its performance of interaction with the world, but presents absolutely no collective and community dimension. So, the message this film sends refers to augmented reality as a cause of an alienation of the subject, to the extent that in the next scene, where the person is in the supermarket and is always surrounded by holograms and virtual information, at some point it shuts down as if there was a bug in the system. So augmented reality shuts down and shows how they are all alone in a grey world. When augmented reality features are turned off, there is nothing left. Well, this judgment, which is a bit negative on the technology of augmented reality, has been overcome through the work that we call collective value. In the case of Planet the Smart City, Planet the Smart City is an installation that was located in Turin, in Piazza Risorgimento. I don't know if it is still there, but it was installed in 2016. The project was about an outdoor gym with machines that could be used by all citizens, and that, if used, would produce energy for the territory. This energy would then be displayed on a totem that would collect environmental data and actually tell the community how much energy it was producing. A smart bench where you could sit and listen to music, and then this interactive totem where information and other types of content were displayed. This shows how, unlike an idea of augmented reality focused on the single subject, here in Planet, at least from a visual point of view, holograms, semi-transparent images that recall all the futuristic and playful imagery of augmented reality disappear. But then, from a narrative point of view, meaning the story conveyed by the application of augmented reality, the fact is that in the first case, the story talks about a single person, a little alienated from technology. In the second case, technology tells the story of the neighborhood in real time, of the community that strives daily to improve their collective performance and not the individual one. So, from a design point of view, going beyond the design as content experience, for example, thinking what virtual content that is information, images, etc., to visualize the user in the augmented reality application, we have to go from a series of 3 previous phases in which we imagine, first of all, what are the forms of the user's interaction with the augmentable surface. So we're talking about a QR code, a content that emerges as a warning form or pop-up message when the user is in a certain GPS coordinate, when the user has to make a certain route within the city to enjoy a certain content. So this also means that the QR code is not the only form of interaction, although it is the most famous. Obviously, a whole communication phase in which the interaction is simulated. And I'm referring, for example, to the trailer of the experience and to the whole communication phase, in which those who produce the application and advertise it within a community must then make sure that the subjects in the community know how to interact with the contents and the surfaces, the augmentable surfaces, can then, of course, increase all this thinking that is upstream of all this planning. Here I quickly tried to grasp the suggestions that these 3 COs, co-creation, co-management, and co-production, gave me if you think about the use of augmented reality. Here, recalling what we said, co-creation is about the incessant production and creation of data by users who produce data through interaction, both the creation by the users themselves of reading and return systems and this information produced. So in the case of Planet, the interactive totem that allows to return the information produced by the users themselves. Co-management concerns precisely the management of these systems by the public administration, the migration towards more accessible digital models, and finally, co-production. This is a slightly more philosophical key, could concern training, the renewed awareness of citizens that starting from a new knowledge, as science emerged from the experience of augmented reality, would become able to give their own contribution to the improvement of the territory, and in this case, the performance of the individual translates into community performance and therefore an increase in reality, qualitative increase in reality. From a socio-cultural point of view, We are talking about planning models of interaction with practices and with the territory concretely, which no longer responds to top-down needs, such as the applications we have talked about, which mainly focus on the engagement of the user, of the spectator, of the buyer in the case of marketing, but also a bottom-up participation in which there is an informal relationship between institutions and citizens, which, however, remain divided between institutions proposing an application and citizens who use it but also manage it. From an economic point of view, it is a matter of re-evaluating the virtual dimension linked to public goods, for instance, the set of information linked to concrete goods, and from a legal point of view, the restitution and reflection on the analysis and dynamic visualization of geolocation data. So, when we talk about an application of augmented reality on which to convey the value of participation, we must start from the assumption that precisely because of what we said at the beginning, the application of augmented reality is mainly for the individual. But if we want to move from the individual to the community, we must understand that the individual must become to the protagonist and transform its individual performance into a collective performance. When we talk about co-management, we always refer to a hierarchical structure, which, however, is not denied by the user, who instead reflects himself in it. Finally, the level of co-production refers to training, action, awareness. If you want the user to promote citizenship through an action that is precisely the individual experience and the interaction of the user in augmented reality. An example that seems appropriate in this case is Building Hopes, an augmented reality project for Google News initiative created in Milan by Giorgia Lupi. In this project, every citizen could create a virtual installation of data art, that is art made from data written on the platform by the user themselves who have decided to participate. For example, when arriving at the Building Hopes site, the user is asked what hopes the user has on the territory, on the city in which he or she lives, on the activities that take place within it, and also on life in general. And these answers turn into a data art sculpture that represents the importance of being persistent. This is the last concept I would like to introduce before concluding. These sculptures with which one interacts are persistent in the sense that they do not change position and are created through the various activities. This virtual content isolated in specific points of the city And I know I will have the possibility to use it with different types of devices, and therefore this becomes virtual content for the community and no longer for the individual. Before concluding, I wanted to talk about this software that is called Metaverse, and it is interesting because at the moment it is the most used software to build simple augmented reality applications without writing a line of code, and is what we were talking about before, a software developer kit, which allows, for instance, to create virtual contents, to position them at certain geographical coordinates with GPS, to make them viewable to everyone, to a group of users, and therefore not only to the individual. An application, for example, that has made people talk a lot was a treasure hunt in San Diego, in which the various contents were virtual coins that citizens had to go to recover by doing physical activity. I'll show the video to let you understand better. It is very short. It really reminds of the images we saw with Pokemon Go, where users went crazy looking for Pokemon. It reminds of those images we saw, but in this case, the content isn't Pokemon, it's virtual coins, and you can put anything as virtual content. So here we go back to the difference between technology and the value that technology conveys, that lies in the ability to interpret and use the potential of technology. And the value of technology lies in the material configuration of its components. So to conclude, augmented reality is certainly a cultural technology that is not only functional to improve the performance of the individual, but that has a meaning within our world culture. The scenarios that have already begun to be glimpsed with Pokemon Go, but that are continuing to be seen with the various augmented reality applications that are being developed, seem to be willing to accommodate management processes that concern, for example, citizens' sense of belonging to public space, thus also keeping alive the sense of democracy that develops through belonging. Perhaps the bottom-up management of data, leaving aside the mediation of institutions, can lead people to think of a socialist organization, I don't know, but it is precisely in the hierarchical structure of the computational world that augmented reality allows us to see visually, but also to feel and make people aware of this hierarchical structure, which the community, in a certain sense, reflects and imitates. On this note, I would like to thank you. Wait, I forgot I put a screenshot of the interface of the application Metaverse, but I think the time is over, so we will talk about this application on another occasion. Thank you all, and I remain available for any questions and clarification that may be needed. Well, thank you, Federico, for the reflections on augmented reality. I remind everyone that if you want, you can start writing your questions in the chat, because at the end we will have a Q&A section, or you can also raise your hand with the Zoom function and we'll give you the floor live. Now, I will give the floor to Antonella Frisiello of the Links Foundation, who in her presentation will show some examples of application of gamification techniques in the social field and the urban field. Thank you, Antonella. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Vittorio. Thank you, Federico, for the very interesting presentation. I will also share the screen now. Tell me if you see my screen. Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. I will start off from Federico's last stimulus, where he showed us a whole series of stimuli that report and recall a little bit the theme. That is the one that Vittorio anticipated, which is gamification, one of the solutions that will be developed within the CO3 project. Today, I will give you some elements of the so-called gamification, in particular by bringing the perspective of the designer, therefore of those who design experiences and services using and introducing gamification within the processes. This is a social technological paradigm, to use a formal definition, that we will experiment within this CO3, and that we are planning together with the University of Turin, the city of Turin, and within the network of Case del Quartiere and several other European partners. The goal is to apply service innovation with a specific focus on commoning forms of participation, co-management, and co-production of services as an alternative form of collaboration between public administration and citizens. In the CO3 project, the use of game elements for non-playful contexts is proposed as a strategy to promote engagement. And then I would like to say that our project is right in the middle of the planning phase, so this could also be a useful opportunity to collect clues, impressions, and curiosity that can feed the final result. As the name basically says, gamification in some way originates from the concept of game. The game is an innate human activity, but not only human, because it unites us with a whole series of animal species as well as primates. And it is an activity that is found substantially without age limits throughout our existence. There are no gender differences. It benefits everyone, regardless of geographical or cultural origin. So, each one of us, thinking recently also about the last games, will have some idea in mind, some moments, some small episode in which he or she has dedicated himself or herself seriously or for fun to a game. By definition, the game is a free and voluntary activity. This piece of text, taken from Homo Ludens by Huizinga, were already in 1938, but it is a very ancient theme. The characteristics of the game were studied. So the game is a free activity that takes place in a conscious way, and the characteristics take place outside, it says, of ordinary life, as you are outlining an environment which is not serious. Actually, this will be useful later to redefine it. What is important is that the game absorbs the player in an intense and complete way, and above all, it is characterized by not having material interests, therefore not having not being directly linked to an economic incentive, not having an economic value, and having a rigorous structure that imposes limits of time, space, rules, and therefore an order of things. The studies also confirm that game is one of the fundamental activities for the construction and development of our capacity for abstraction, communication, concepts, and meanings. Batson tells us that play is a framework for action. In this context, we find the opportunities and the occasions to form the basis of our social activities and learning. So the game essentially allows us to make a shift in the frame, a shift in the context, and allows us to make experiences, mistakes, and therefore to test and learn. Actually, it is not a new idea. This is a concept that has also been more recently put into system in a whole series of areas in sports, such as Formula One, but also in the army, in surgical medicine. Simulation situations, areas of game are created in which people can practice and that are used for training games. All of this is not new. Already in the 18th century there was a series of them. Today we call them serious game in the sense that they are designed as games aimed at a specific goal of change. For example, there are many of them in the educational field. I've taken one here, but really the choice and the applications are endless. Among other things, they are intended for audiences of all ages. This, for example, is a game that was designed by Net Smart Kids to address the issue of online security. So the creative and productive use of technologies in a safe way. We were talking about the military field and the medical field, and this is the screenshot of a game called Pulse, which is a training platform where clinicians can practice in making decisions, in familiarizing with the processes of professional practice without exposing patients and themselves before the practice, the real practice. In the urban context, Federico showed us many beautiful examples where substantially, also thanks to augmented reality technology, but not only, the collective themes of urban scale can be taken as object of playful experiences. Here I mention a project on which the Links Foundation has also worked, a serious game designed ad hoc to encourage and promote safe mobility through collaborative behavior. Basically, people were somehow recognized in their decisions and used ecological means of transport rather than collective transport systems. Or in the socio-political field, as Federico has already pointed out, there is an escalation, or rather I would say an evolution in the capacity of these technologies. Actually, this is not a technology to cure, to widen the range of action also in the field and on issues of a wider interest. This game is called Palestine, and the goal is to challenge those who play, or rather to challenge the beliefs of those who play on the theme of conflict. So basically, the player plays the role of a journalist who arrives in Jerusalem and has to prepare an editorial piece. To do this, he needs a whole series of information that obviously propose a whole series of context complexities. The game offers a whole series of learning resources, so there are texts in the manuals of information sources that allow the person to learn and basically build his own point of view. And then there are also the tools to express it through journalistic writing. Basically, with a whole series of experimentation, products and experiences, we arrived then in 2014, in which at the University of New York, Zimmerman, together with other colleagues, released a manifesto of the ludic century, the playful century, which in reality only sanctioned what was the wave that was taking place in the last few years. That is to say, to recognize the importance of games as an opportunity to promote people, not only as consumers, but also to move people from the role of consumers to the role of creators, or as we would like to try to do on the CO3 project, co-creators. From this point, the step to be taken is short because companies had already started to make extensive use of the communicative and experiential register of games and gamification to put into products and processes. Then many other sectors will follow until the public administration begins to become more and more common. Federico gave us a beautiful anticipation of a whole series of examples. However, we find it in governance practices, that is in the processes of digitalization of public administration, a progressive introduction of technologies in the processes of governance, of public affairs and public dynamics, basically for various purposes to ensure greater accessibility, transparency, but also inclusion. These innovations, therefore, are often found also in the civic sphere. For example, to favor a better contact or form of dialogue with the specific segments of the population. For example, to bring young people closer to civic and political issues as a channel of interaction between public administrations, citizens, so-called in general, but in any case, substantially through society, who can find new forms of interaction to involve them in a more active way, also taking part in common decisions. Excuse me, this image that keeps on turning was taken from an installation of Public Art Lab in Berlin, where people were invited to launch a series of stimuli concerning the public administration, which were considered then to build proposals for the city. This is a very recent example, even if here we are in the field of video games and concerns the language of games, which is also beginning to be adopted by politicians. This is an article that tells the numbers reached by Ocasio-Cortez, who invited young people to go and vote in the video game Among Us. This video, which achieved record results, has been seen by 5.3 million people. That is, it has been watched 5.3 million times, and anyway, certainly not only for this, but by chance, also for this reason, this was the American presidential election that recorded the highest number of votes, maybe even thanks to these changes of register. Another experience is that of Future Melbourne, in which the city of Melbourne has put gamification into the experience and the project of crowdsourcing, that is to say, the collection of information, ideas proposed by citizens to start imagining and planning ambitiously what will be the city of Melbourne in 2026. IT was introduced to the technological mode of crowdsourcing with some game elements, including a final prize, which also includes the possibility to sit down at the table and participate in the working group that will write the plan of the city of Melbourne for 2026. I still have games that have always been carried out on by and promoted by public administrations, in which ecological issues are highlighted and are also proposed for research. First of all, to raise awareness, and then perhaps to elaborate strategies that can help to solve a common problem. Last but not least, this is also just to ask a question about the state cashback. Can we consider it an application of gamification? What happens when people start using digital payment methods? An economic about will be returned to the purchasers. I mentioned this to say that the incentive is not to be confused with the gamification. In fact, there are other elements that characterize a gamification project that do not only involve an incentive. This is a trap which many people sometimes fall into when thinking about gamification. So basically, what is gamification? First of all, it's not a game. We buy, download a standalone product. It's not just a system of incentives. It is a mixed and hybrid mode in which we can enrich existing services. So it is not a game in itself, but it is a level of service that is added to existing services, which are enriched through mechanisms and dynamics that are inspired by traditional games. No matter what kind, we'll now see what are the characteristic elements of this area. The characteristic is that they are applied to very serious, non-playful context. Even if the game is a serious thing, they are applied in non-playful context to enrich services, as we said before, and then to promote, for instance, a certain behavior or the discovery of new services, or simply the awareness and information on specific and particular issues. The use and inspiration of these elements of game aim at recreating and bringing back to service contexts those positive conditions that influence the human cognition behavior, which are typical of the areas of play. So basically, it's true that they also use motivational elements to involve people and groups with the aim of promoting a naturally positive change in people's behaviors and beliefs. What changes with respect to games? Basically, the aim is outside the game. If within games we play for and within that framework, here the purpose is outside the game because it is dictated by the purpose of services and goals, and the goals and, that we can introduce by game elements support it. Therefore, certain relationships do not change. For example, the relationship between results and actions, and some of the basic elements that are imported into the target context do not change. Let's see what they are. Actually, the literature on gamification game design is very wide. I will present here, also because we have referred to it, one of the most applied framework, which basically identifies three fundamental elements as design elements for a gamification experience. So in the meantime, the dynamics. A game dynamic is a set of rules and modes according to which we can play. So those who design tend to be inspired by the most famous dynamics or combine them. There are the famous games of colonization, like Risico and all those of this kind, of this family. There are puzzle games, games that refer to care and routine models, treasure runs. In short, we can draw on our experiences to understand how many and what are the dynamics of the game that can be imported in a field of service. Choosing the dynamics of the game is fundamental because it allows us to plan on the basis of specific motivation and therefore to plan those challenges and those missions and those actions that will be substantially useful to cover the progression towards the final goal. An example of a colonization dynamic from a few years ago was Foursquare, an application that allowed you to colonize and become a mayor of various locations once you reached a sufficient and high number of check-ins in a certain place, and could also be dethroned by others. Game dynamics use the game mechanics, all those tools and elements that basically allow people to play. Also here, there are some typical elements which can result in the most varied forms. I don't know, for instance, the points, medals, levels that we can introduce and which actually involve all those occasions in which the person becomes aware of the progress made. When we talk about challenges, wanting to free the field from any doubts, it is not necessarily a question of introducing competitive or aggressive dynamic, because the challenge can also be towards oneself in defining a goal that the player decides to undertake and face. Here I put an image taken from TripAdvisor, which is basically a platform not for games but for reviews, hotels, restaurants, and businesses of this kind, which, as it were, enriches the experience and, above all, motivates the reviewers. It strongly needs support and constant updates as far as the quality of the information it collects through different systems and types of badges or medals. This is important to analyze because just as in games, in gamification paths, what you want to trace is not a linear path from point A to point B. The goal is to be able to open and then recognize the paths that allow the expression of different experiences. So it is not a trivial dynamic of victory or defeat, but a path of expansion and recognition and development of skills that can also be enhanced through purely symbolic prizes. Also because literature confirms it, prizes of an economic nature can work initially but have a much lower motivation persistence. It is the symbolic awards, the significant recognition that go to touch people, values that can perhaps interest more than concrete values that are more effective. The last element, actually not the last one, but one of the most important, that the designer must take care of with great attention is the aesthetic of games, that is the narrative substratum of which Federico already highlighted the fundamental role in the digital experience, but not only. And it is precisely aesthetics then that set of elements that integrate all the components through narrative, but also visual elements, metaphors, in short, the story, the red thread, which allows us to integrate not only the playful components that we have inserted in our experience of gamification, but that allows us to connect this playful level to the real context, so that the red thread of meaning is the sense that the person manages to follow to connect these two levels of experience. Also here, I only put two examples. The images all colored are the metaphors that we see again in the pages of the Duolingo lingo application that brings back a little bit to fairy tale childish dimension. And the group of icons below are those used by the Nike application, in which the person proposes goals of fitness nature and can therefore reach these goals. It is a completely different nature, and also visually and graphically, but this is something we're all aware of. So, these are a few basic elements that we are explicitly investigating and recombining within the CO3 project that focuses on issues that are also difficult to put together because on the one hand we have a technological bottom-up innovation in the sense that some solutions have been identified to be tested and evaluated in terms of social impact, and this is the second issue. So the relevance and the ability to promote these new ways to bring together and enrich the dialogue and collaboration between the citizens and public administration. Turin is, as Vittorio said, one of the three cities that will experience this system of services, and Case del Quartiere have been identified as increased spaces within which these technologies will be proposed. This concept is therefore also inspired by the concept of commoning and insists a lot on collaboration and horizontality of dynamics and participation. So, how did we move to design the gamification within the CO3 project? We set ourselves a goal and a path to reach this goal. The goal is to support the operative modalities of the co-creation, co-production, and co-management that also Federico has focused on very well before through a path. So gamification is the level added to the definition of the project through a path that wants to define a set of evolutionary steps that we have identified in four moments. One is access, then the set of actions that recognize, for example, curiosity and contact with this augmented, increased dimension of Casa del Quartiere through the available content created and co-created to be enjoyed in augmented reality. The next level are further forms of participation, even more concrete, with a whole series of actions that involve taking part in the initiative of co-management of services through increased management of volunteering, so the possibility to test economic technologies. So, as I said, further forms of participation, so implication in co-management through increased management. As I said, finally, the highest level that we have identified in co-creation as the maximum expression of the commitment is the one in which citizens begin to launch and actively propose initiatives and activities in terms of co-creation of services. As I was saying, at this moment we are in progress. So we have involved Case del Quartiere in the planning, inviting them to get their hands on the black box of technology. Usually gamification is a product that comes out of this team of experts who design and a very complete experience, design the challenge, and then launch it. And so from that moment on, the experience is largely participatory, but the design is usually not. What we have done here is starting from the design to share the logic from the very beginning and to basically create an open system to measure the values and characteristics of Casa del Quartiere. So at this moment, we are at the point where we have identified the context, the actions. We are thinking about the actions with points, mechanisms, and medals. Actually, we are missing the most beautiful part, which is the narrative, the red thread, which is the story we want to tell, as Federico said about his layer. And of course, we are also engaged as a link foundation together with other partners on technological developments. I didn't speak much about technology because gamification is not a technology. It can work without technology. Obviously, we do everything or almost everything today with the support of technology. And also in this case, we are obviously working to design a system that has characteristics supporting the stimulating but not invasive experience with respect to real space and time, and above all trying to make the best use of technologies and skills. So we have to create a non-linear dynamic that is not simple in the sense of simplified as the games of winning losing, but to define articulated objectives that are closer to the values of the project and the project stakeholders. So we also have our challenges, and with this I'm going to conclude. If before the pandemic in gamification we maximize the collective dynamic in this commoning-oriented perspective that is equal, open, collaborative, and creative, even that of designing an open experience, and this is probably the most innovative part of this chapter of the project, because thanks to the contribution of the University of Turin, a tool is being designed and it allows the managers of Casa del Quartiere to actively manage the gamification, not to receive it from above, but to appropriate it, to own it, and also to modulate it during the execution of the services and therefore during the experience. This is a tool that will allow to define both the elements of the individual experience and the elements of the collective experience. So again, to go back to the two categories Federico introduced on the previous digital experience. So basically, make CO3 and gamification of CO3 an open experience that gives the commoners the possibility to use it for the goals of the common itself. Then we added the challenge linked to the etching pandemic, and so we also faced this emergency, redefining the objectives and making available the elements highlighted in favor of, for example, facilitating the adoption of safe behavior as far as remote or hybrid participation is possible, therefore to reward more forms of safe participation from a health point of view, to offer a social opportunity of connection between people, services and association, and maybe to further facilitate the adoption of services also in the economic contingency and to promote the use of political technologies that will be included in the project for experimentation. This is where we got. We are open to receive ideas, suggestions, because our work is in progress. Thank you. Well, thanks. Thanks, Antonella. As we said before, you can use the hand raising function, or you can write directly in chat your question, and our speakers will answer. I will try to break the ice with a question I wanted to ask both of you. The CO3 project also wants to test the benefits and the risks of these technologies. Now, without focusing specifically, these methodologies and technologies that we saw today, and we also saw a piece of a slightly dystopian video, what kind of risks can they present? How can citizens recognize and protect themselves, starting from gamification? The gamification provides mechanisms that aim in a certain way to stimulate a certain set of behaviors. They are also somehow able to manipulate us in some way to make an activity addictive. We know that games can be addictive. Are there these kinds of concerns? And if so, how can we recognize and defend ourselves? First of all, gamification is not a game. That's what I dwelt on the premise. So certainly, at the moment when we want to say the use of a service becomes massive and the gamification service becomes intensive, we must first think that the person is using that service. So basically, we think of the gamification of apps as a support, for example, to running, athletics, training. Actually, as it is thought, uh, as a hybrid system, it should not, or in any case, there are no relevant studies in the literature that report those mechanisms of addiction that are instead studied and connected, for example, to the use of video games. Ludopathy is far from gamification. Then, the gamification, as I said, was born on the basis of a design idea that identifies and chooses upstream a whole series of actions to be recognized and then rewarding mechanisms. I would say that there is a lack of volumes to enter into the dynamics of addiction. The gamification uses small data and therefore they are almost representative of a sampling experience. So in the experience, the use of a surface is sampled through some elements which can be somehow recognized. Then if we think that we are in an experimental context in which also the number of users is very small, we understand that the context of reference is not able to generate a so challenging dimension. So so wide that instead maybe we can find on certain games that have a global relevance and that could therefore be linked to serious risks. Then, of course, there are other risks, privacy, for example. I do not know, maybe we were talking more about risks related to the use, but gamification is a very different dynamic than games. It is much less invasive. Yes, if I can say something too, thanks for the super interesting question. I agree with Antonella about this absence of risks. Even if just while you were talking about gamification, I was thinking about how much gamification massively re-entered in our digital experience, and we find elements of gamification also where we couldn't find any. For example, I was thinking about the likes mania or the elements linked to competitiveness or so on social networks, the phenomenon of influencers, in which the concept of accumulating points, accumulating likes, accumulating visibility, in which the dimension of the game is totally foreign. It is no longer a game there, but something with social, psychological consequences of this competitiveness. I don't know if there are risks related to gamification itself, but it is a sign that gamification has entered our worlds and hides in many contexts. As far as augmented reality is concerned, I don't think we'll ever find ourselves all wearing glasses and being all isolated. In the days of Pokemon Go, there was talk. That is, the most critical newspaper articles were those that accused Pokemon Go of distracting the user who was on the street looking for Pokemon and therefore got distracted and didn't pay attention to the street anymore, risking to be run over by cars. Other criticized the fact that even business people contacted Nintendo, who developed Pokemon Go, to have them put Pokemon purposefully next to the business to get users to go there. But here we're talking about exploiting a situation, and I think we can't get rid of that. Yes. We don't hear you. While we're waiting for more questions to come up, I'd like to ask a question to the public. How many of those who have logged in are people from Casa del Quartiere, thus being people who will have the chance to experience our applications? Try raising your hand to say that you go to Casa del Quartiere so we can see how many of you are here if you're still listening to us. I'll start raising my hand. Does the system of raising hands work? Because I don't see anyone raising their hands. You should have it on Zoom. I'm talking to Simonetta. So you don't know Casa del Quartiere, or you've never visited them? I talk so it'll be faster. I knew they were there. I went a few years ago to see some theater plays, but I didn't know there was this initiative, so I didn't know. It's interesting to know that we have reached someone outside the public of Casa del Quartiere. In these years, I've been looking for something on augmented reality, even just lessons to attend. I tried a little bit on my own, but I didn't get many results. Okay. Well, within the project, you will have the possibility to create and place some objects within the augmented reality of Casa del Quartiere. So when we'll be finally able to go there again, waiting for the decree to allow it, we will be able to do it. Oh, yes, also I wanted to know, because I missed the first minutes. I don't know if you said anything or any way. I didn't understand this thing. If even those who don't participate in the project can still come. Now anyone will be able to come to Casa del Quartiere and try out the different technologies. Obviously, abiding by the ministerial decree, for the moment it's not possible to go to Casa del Quartiere except for activities necessary from the point of view of basic needs. But we hope that soon the dynamics of contagions will allow us to move again. Does this project involve all the premises of Casa del Quartiere? That's right, I didn't say that at the beginning. There will be 3 premises belonging to Casa del Quartiere involved, and they are Casa del Quartiere di San Salvario, Casa del Quartiere Checky Point, and Più Spazio Quattrocchie. And where are they located? The one in San Salvario district is in Via Morgari 14, the Checky Point one is in Via Antonio Cecchi 17, in the Aurora district, on the other side of the Dora River, coming from Borgo Dora, Porta Palazzo. Più Spazio 4 is instead in the San Donato district in Via Saccarelli 18. Okay, thanks. There is another question by Clara Lalezzi, if you want to try to remove the mute. Yes, good morning. I'm not from Turin, but I met the project at mine during the social responsibility fair. With regard to the social impact that is closely linked to this reality, I wanted to understand if the inclusion of gamification and some dynamics could perhaps also facilitate the monitoring of results themselves. This is a very good question. I don't know if Antonella wants to answer. If not, I can also say that something from the point of view of Casa del Quartiere, and you could add something related to the technology. But let's say there will be an app through which all CO3 technologies will be conveyed. In fact, we are also interested in understanding how data the app collects, data on the use of the prepaid card rather than on the use of augmented reality, visualization, production of augmented reality content, participation in activity, etc. are all data that we generally try to collect for our impact assessment. So we hope that the use of this app can be useful to make the work of data collection easier and more immediate. Yes, I can also say from the technological point of view, the idea is just that behind there is a system of detection, recognition of some parameters that want to be precisely those which will allow us to make analysis in relation to the adoption and use of the various technologies, then, if possible, also in relation to the impacts and metrics. The metrics and the impact assessment paradigm are currently in the process of being clarified, and for how gamification works. Data are collected in a transparent way. Data are then returned to the individual person, and then the idea is to use data to give a vision of commoning useful to the project. Thank you very much. We still have a few more minutes if you have any questions. If not, I'll take the opportunity to ask one too, because actually these informative meetings are organized to ask some questions. I don't know if you're familiar with the social credit score system from China. When we assign badges on the basis of behaviors that have a social value, which are, for example, making donation on a crowdfunding campaign rather than doing a lot of voluntary work. Is there really a risk that in this way these badges that can be won could somehow be used to reward on the one hand, but also stigmatize antisocial behavior on the other hand? Yes, yes, there is certainly a risk in the sense that this is a precisely a very delicate issue, and this is the part of gamification that is outside the technology, and therefore that set of values and procedural rules that make up the whole process. This is also the idea of being able to create a system that is open and therefore modifiable on the go during the experience, just to make it more participatory and open to the questioning of logic that may not work. So something that can be changed on the basis of evidence, but it is absolutely the most terrifying example I can think of. I was immediately reminded of an episode of Black Mirror, not by chance a dystopian one, in which a similar system is presented. The protagonist, the main character, loses all social points and falls into an absolute social depression. I tried to give a philosophical and ideological answer, which takes up a little bit the last thing I said, in the sense that the hierarchy within society, the division into social classes between good and bad behaviors, has always been there in some way. And bad behaviors have always been subject of social stigma, like the good ones, of promotion and valorization. Perhaps what gamification and augmented reality, but also blockchains and the technological system can ensure, from a technological point of view, is that the judgment is ruled by an artificial intelligence, a logical engine that makes decisions on who to reward and who not in a mathematical way. That is, to replace the social judgment of the man who is fallible and so on, replacing him with an artificial intelligence that ensures this intersocial equity. But also, since artificial intelligence is developed by a human being, we talk about cultural biases and prejudices within algorithms and so on, which is a paradigm shift in the evaluation of judgment. All right. I'd say that if there are no more questions, we've reached more or less the time we planned. So before saying goodbye, I'd like to tell you that next Saturday at the same time there will be a second CO3 conference linked this time to the blockchain, which for those who do not know is the architecture behind the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but can also have a series of applications ranging from certification to food chains, application in the social sphere. And hopefully this conference can help you a little bit to understand technology, but also how it can be used in Casa del Quartiere. Having said this, I would like to thank Federico and Antonello for their participation in today's meeting, and would also like to thank all those who have connected with us. Thank you. Let me add the last thing, Vittorio. The event will be shared on social media of the city of Turin and Casa del Quartiere, as well as on the project website, together with all needed information. Also on the Torino Social Impact website, on the social profiles of Casa del Quartiere, where you found the information about this new meeting. On the Facebook profiles of all partners involved, you will find all the details of the partners participating in the Casa del Quartiere project, and you will also find the link to connect. Thank you all. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.